So this happened a few years ago when I was about 18. I'm 25 now, but I still think about it relatively often. Anyway, I was at a local gas station after my work shift. It was around 12 a.m. as I was a closer where I worked. I didn't actually need gas. I just stopped for a drink, so I parked in the parking lot rather than at the pump. As I walked out of the gas station, a tall, skinny man, probably in his 30s, called out to me. He asked if I knew him. I replied that I didn't, and he asked me if I'd like to. I told him I'd like to go home, that I'd just gotten off work, and I was tired. Now it's important to mention that I was still wearing my work shirt and name tag. In hindsight, I realized this was probably not a great idea. I turned away from the man and started walking back to my car, and he started following me. He called me beautiful, said that he liked my hair, and then he asked me to give him a ride home. I politely declined and repeated that I just wanted to go home. He then told me that he was harmless and asked again. I said no more firmly, and he said okay, but then asked me for a hug. I declined the hug, but then he suddenly leaned forward and kissed my cheek. Then he ran around and hopped into my passenger seat. I felt sick, and I screamed at him to get the F out of my car or I'd call the police. He put his hands up, said okay, and got out and started walking away. This isn't the end of the story, though. I ended up still telling local police about him and found out that he has previous charges for drugs, sexual assault, and assault with a deadly weapon. I decided not to go to that gas station anymore. Remember where I said that I had my work shirt and name tag? This is where that info becomes relevant. A few days later, while I was at work, we got a call. My boss answered it and said it was a call for me from my Uncle Richard. I don't have an Uncle Richard. I declined the call. 2 days after the call, the man showed up at my work and again asked for me by name. Luckily, I was standing in the back by the security monitors and recognized him. My boss told him I wasn't there and let me work in the back for the rest of the day. I filed a police report for stalking, and I never saw him again. This happened well over 10 years ago, so I'll try my best to describe the events accurately. One of my childhood homes had a balcony that was attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine via big double glass doors on each of our rooms. Next to the balcony are 2 trees. One I often used to climb up and down from the balcony. This balcony faced out to the street. One night when I was about 13-year-old girl, and my brother and mother weren't home, I was reading in bed with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like someone moving in one of the trees outside, but this didn't worry me, as possums and bats are common in our area. Now, I had thin curtains on the glass doors that separated my room and the balcony. As mentioned previously, the doors faced out towards the street, where the street lamp light was always visible through my curtains. Shortly after hearing the tree rustling noises, I see a shadow slowly move past the doors, at which point I immediately turn off my reading light and freeze, like a deer in headlights. The shadow is tall, so it wasn't one of the neighbor kids that I'm friends with, and it wasn't my all of 5-foot-tall mother. This person moved slowly, creeping as though they were trying not to be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see in my room, but I could see them thanks to the street lights behind them, creating a dark silhouette. They moved past my doors out of sight. I sat there, unable to move or even think about what to do, other than be absolutely still. That is, until I heard another sound. The sound of someone trying to open a glass door, my mom's doors, to the balcony. I didn't know if she had locked them or not, but I wasn't taking chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to my bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now, but they were still jiggling the glass door handle, but it sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief. This person couldn't get in, surely. All I had to do was wait for them to realize that, and then they would leave, right? Well, I heard light footsteps move back along the balcony to my set of glass doors, until I saw his shadow stop directly in front of them. Again, I froze. He couldn't see me. He couldn't know I can see him. I saw a shadow of a hand reach up to my door's handle, and my heart stopped. Had I actually locked those doors myself today? I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity, but thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed such a sigh of relief. I was worried he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a mobile phone, as my mom thought me too young to have one yet, and the landline was at the other end of the house. But I was too scared to take my eyes off this person, even to call for help. I was silently crying, tears falling down my cheeks as I internally prayed they would just leave. Then I heard him stop moving. He then said,
"I could just break the glass, you know."
Before I could even process this, I saw car headlights turn around the corner of my street and then stop at our property gate. My mom was home. The person on the balcony moved out of sight, and I heard a loud thump as they jumped off of it. When my mom came inside, I was hysterical and was barely coherent in telling her what happened. Eventually, I got the message across, and she called the police. They never found or caught anyone, but a neighbor reported a truck in the street that matched the description of a truck that had been reported recently for attempted child abductions near my school, a block away. Since I walked that short distance daily, the police suspected that he had followed me or seen that I lived there and waited for me to be alone. So, creepy dude who scared the hell out of a 13-year-old girl, let's never meet. This is a story that's really been bothering me lately for absolutely no reason whatsoever. A few months back, I just had this dream that brought back this memory I tried to suppress growing up, but as of recently, it's been weighing on my mind. Growing up in 2005, on the edge of the suburbs, there was a large grove of trees and hills by some railroad tracks that lead up to a big forest about half a mile from my house. When I was 9 years old, me and my neighborhood friends would ride our bikes to the railroad tracks and walk to the forest to go explore the random pieces of furniture and junk in this peculiar forest. We'd play card games, do homework, and hang with friends out there for about an hour or two, but never sat out there too long. There were small abandoned houses here and there in the forest that we stayed away from, as one neighborhood friend, Michael, told me that there was a homeless man who lived in one of them, and if you saw him, run. So, right off the bat, after hearing this, going near this house in the woods was scary as it could be. One chilly November afternoon after school, I came home and dropped off my backpack at my house and immediately went to the woods. My bike was broken, so I walked. Michael had told me at school that day to meet him in the open area of the forest to play Pokemon with him. This was something we frequently do growing up, just to pass the time until our parents got home at 4 p.m., so it was nothing unusual. As I crossed the railroad tracks to the forest, I instantly felt a weird sensation, that feeling you feel when someone is watching you. I looked all around and couldn't see anyone. So I thought I was just getting spooked, as the rather overcast day was very eerie anyway. Trekking through the autumn leaves scattered across this large wooded area, I came upon the big open area where I was supposed to meet Michael. Near the area where we normally met was his notebook, open. On the page was written, "Hey, I had to go back home and grab some batteries for my Game Boy. Wait for me here. I'll be back soon. Michael." I waited. Being alone, especially feeling like someone was watching me, made this particular moment very uncomfortable. However, I convinced myself I was just being a wuss and decided to wait for Michael. I sat down and began playing my Game Boy. It wasn't too long until that sensation of being watched grew into utter paranoia. I kept frantically looking up from my Game Boy and checking my watch to see how long I'd been waiting. I'd been sitting there for 30 minutes. It was beginning to get dark. Then I heard some leaves crunch. I looked in the direction of the sound and briefly saw a dark, hooded figure peeking from behind a few trees, hide back behind them. My skin crawled, and I immediately jumped from where I was sitting and froze in my tracks, staring. I screamed, "Hello," to see if anyone was there. I was quickly reminded that I wasn't alone when I saw this tall, dirty-looking hooded man peek back around from the trees. He called back,
"Hey, buddy."
I picked up Michael's notebook and ran for my life. I ran so fast, I barely had time to look behind me. However, I heard leaves crunching not too far behind me. It was the man running after me. He was screaming for me to
"Come back.
and
I just wanted to talk to you. I'm sorry."
I began crying as I was running, thinking that this is exactly how those missing kids disappear. I ran and ran and ran until I literally tripped over the railroad tracks and cut up my knees. Michael was just getting to the railroad tracks. He saw me, dirty and bloody and crying hysterically, and I screamed at him to run. Without question, we ran all the way home. The hooded man was nowhere to be seen once we left the railroad tracks. I last saw him standing in the woods, defeated that he couldn't catch me or something. I don't know. I told Michael everything, and we never went back to the woods ever again. Years later, in 2016, they bulldozed the woods and built a neighborhood there. We later found out from fellow neighborhood friends who were in that area the same thing happened to them growing up. To this day, this is probably one of my scariest stories growing up.